Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. In Minnesota, they're just pulling out all the stops, aren't they? Keith Ellison is suing the Trump administration over the surge in Minnesota, and he's not alone. It seems that there's not many people in political office there who aren't looking for a way to bring a suit against the Trump administration. The officials in Minnesota are doing everything they can to show just how much white lives matter. It's gotten to the point that both the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension have sued the Department of Homeland Security after they were locked out of the probe into the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. The Minnesota authorities said that they want to make sure that no evidence is being destroyed by DHS that would be relevant to this incident because they want to conduct their own investigation. Now, to have the Hennepin County Prosecutor's Office involved is amazing. This killing only happened on Saturday, and yet within 48 hours, they're already filing lawsuits demanding information. They want to ask questions. Now, when it came to the cases of white cops murdering black citizens in Minnesota, the same Hennepin County Prosecutor's Office dragged their feet for months. They allowed for all of those criminal investigations into these police murders to just drag on until hopefully they faded from the headlines, and the white media would do their part to make sure that happened. They wanted all of these investigations to just die a natural death, like they did with Derek Chauvin for the better part of 20 years. They needed to send those cases to a grand jury. As Amy Klobuchar said, well, that's just what we do. We don't really bring charges ourselves. We send it to a grand jury. And of course, they move at a glacial pace before they actually do that. And then, as we all know, the grand jury process is secret behind closed doors. So no doubt those prosecutors are also saying, well, just because the public thinks that there's a case, that doesn't mean that there actually is. So you want to think about that before you bring an indictment against these cops. Besides, the niggers had it coming. But now, all of a sudden, those same white prosecutors are demanding that there has to be something done about the killing of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Gee, I wonder why. They don't have the ability to bring criminal charges against anyone, but they're bringing charges literally for everything else. This is what they do when you're the right color. Have they ever sued these police departments to obtain or preserve information after a black person was killed? Or did they just say, well, we have to let them finish their investigation first. We can't jump to conclusions. I know that we're all very agitated. We're taking this very seriously, and we want you to know that we're disturbed by what we see. Now, they're not using the word disturbed when it comes to these killings of white people. Instead, what they're saying is they're outraged. Something has to be done. And if not, well, then they're going to do something. See, the reason that black people aren't getting all worked up about these killings that are taking place by ICE is because we already know that the white authorities are going to go to the mat for these white victims. Demonstrate for what? For the authorities to take action? They already are. And they didn't wait for any sort of protests or demonstrations. They just did it automatically. And protest what? Protest the exact same thugs who the people like Keith Ellison and others have allowed to run around killing people. Now that you got ICE coming to town and doing the same thing, now all of a sudden there's supposed to be protests for that? Well, you're too damn late. You should have been doing something when black people were the ones being killed, instead of trying to establish a deliberate legal environment of immunity from law if you kill a black person, because that's what they were really doing. You didn't need for it to be an actual law in the books. It was just something like we see across the country. These prosecutors and these judges, they already have an unwritten but fiercely enforced policy of prosecuting a black person if they defend themselves. And if a black person is killed, we'll make sure the other person gets away with it, if they're the right color. This is a confidence-building exercise that the authorities in Minnesota are doing. They're trying to maintain the confidence of the white taxpayers in that area. That's what they're really concerned about. This is the tax base here. And if they're getting killed in the streets, why, they might want to leave, or otherwise they might want somebody else in office. And we got to go ahead and reassure them that if they are touched by the law, or they find themselves being harmed by anyone for that matter, well, then these white authorities are going to be tripping over their shoelaces to move heaven and earth to make sure that something is done. Because they've got the right skin color, the complexion for the protection. While I don't take any sides in this affair whatsoever because there's no good guys here, there's nobody to root for here, there's no heroes here. Nonetheless, I do find it very interesting how what Trump is doing is shaking things up. It's making people actually have to go on the record with what they really believe. America's always trying to use some so-called war as a way to distract from having to face the day of reckoning for what it owes to us across the board. That's why I make it a point to remember Dr. King. He opposed the Vietnam War primarily because, as he himself said, prior to Vietnam, the big issue in America, in fact, the only issue, was black liberation. The nation was being confronted with it, forced to have to face up to it, and they were also being compelled to make concessions after 100 years of political procrastination. But then came Vietnam, and Dr. King immediately recognized it for the gigantic distraction that it was. And that was exactly the purpose that it served. It's supposed to be too big. We can't worry about what you niggers want. Why? We gotta go over there and fight the communists on the other side of the world for a place we can't even find on a map. And once they realized that this tactic worked, they spent the last 50 plus years consistently ginning up some sort of so-called war or conflict or other to kick the can down the road and avoid the inevitable. Anything to change the subject. In 2020, they got a taste of what could happen if they didn't. So in reality, COVID was actually a lifesaver for them. They'd much rather deal with a global pandemic than to face the music here at home. And we see it going on right now. What's going on here with the authorities is not them trying to have an argument with Trump. The real goal is to shout us down. They want the political benefits of being able to have support necessary to get back Congress, but they don't want to leave themselves vulnerable like they did in 2020 to even have to pretend as if they're going to accede to black demands. That's the point they have to reach. And don't kid yourselves. If the Democrats fail to get back Congress, if they land flat on their faces, sure, some of them will blame Republican gerrymandering in places like Texas, mainly because it's there, they're not making it up. But while Texas is more obnoxious about what they're doing, the reality is Democrats have spent the last 90 years trying to find ways to get the black vote without having to actually do anything for the black vote. That's why I went through that little historical lesson the other Sunday about A. Philip Randolph and Walter White having to go 13 rounds with President Roosevelt and the extreme lengths that the so-called New Deal liberal went to in his fight to resist doing something as common sense and common decency as tell his own government not to discriminate against black people. Then, as now, Roosevelt didn't need an act of Congress to make it happen. He didn't need to conduct a study, and he didn't need to get Republican support either. It just goes to show the times change, but these people don't. The problem since 1619 has been that this racist white regime doesn't want to do what black people say. They will use any lie they can, if we're silly enough to buy into it, to postpone the inevitable. But no matter what they may tell you, the real reason is, well, black people are saying it's going to upset the racial status quo, which is based on anti-black racism and black oppression, and we're not going to upset that apple cart. Democrats wouldn't even be a minority in Congress if they did right by us. But they made the political calculation a long time ago that they would rather only control Congress every few years as opposed to do what black people say and control Congress 100% of the time. Black voters are the ones who made it where Democrats controlled Congress for most of the 20th century. But even then, LBJ's big preoccupation was with losing the affection of his fellow white Southern racists. He didn't need white Southern voters. But this wasn't about winning an election. It was about maintaining a particular racial status quo. The anger that we've been seeing from the white left at what's happened to those two white people is a manifestation of this exact same philosophy. They are far more angry at a white woman who was shot to death trying to drive away from a gun-toting Fed than they were about the murder of Philandro Castile, Terrence Crutcher, or any of the black motorists murdered by police who weren't even trying to move their car, or in the case of Mr. Crutcher, he was shot outside of his vehicle. These white liberals are furious about Renee Good and Alex Pretty being killed because when they look at those two white people, they see themselves. More to the point, when they look at white people who get killed, they see human beings. And that's the entire problem. As far as they're concerned, if you're not white, you're not actually human. When talking about the black people who have been heinously murdered for the last 20 years at least, all of these same white liberals who are getting dewy-eyed today, back then they were talking like it was like a puppy who got hit on the highway or something. Oh yeah, they were saddened, a little, but they certainly weren't angry, they weren't furious. They wanted to give sympathy, but they didn't want anything actually done about it. This is the so-called allies that we've had all these decades. Well, as the old saying goes, adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. And they're putting their character on full display. Donald Trump, no matter what you may think of him, he's making more white people mad than we ever did. Not just in the U.S., but abroad. And there's value to that. Donald Trump can't stop himself from this self-destructive behavior because of the fact that he sees himself as the embodiment of white supremacy. And that means he has the terminal disease of arrogance. It's always been there, just underneath the surface. The fake smiles, the phony courtesy, it's all just a mask to make sure they can get close enough to their victim to take them out. That's what it's really about. It has nothing to do with earning a place in the world. It has nothing to do with honesty. Because honesty, integrity, and hard work are the antithesis of white supremacy. White supremacy was set up not for the sake of making white people work hard, but to do exactly the opposite. To make sure that if you're classified as white, you're going to be getting things for free, like the Homestead Act and every other government program that's come down the pike. When you have a global order based on being defined as inherently superior, you don't have to be humble. Trump, and I say this with tongue firmly in cheek, in a perverted kind of way, the orange man does have one thing in common with reparations. He too is a subject so volatile, so provocative, so dangerous, that people can't do the usual non-answer answer when talking about him. When you talk about Trump, you have to say something. Either you're in favor of him or you're opposed. There are very few people who are in the middle. And for those who oppose him, they feel like they have to say it. It's too dangerous for them to be quiet. When you have political gridlock, when you face a political impasse, you don't get through it by being nice. The people who you see telling you that you have to be nice and that you better not take a certain tone and that you need to make sure you don't step on anybody's toes, these are the people who like things exactly the way they are. These are the people who tell us you're going to mess it up for the rest of us. The rest of us? Really? Trump, and I hate to give the angry little Cheeto credit, but he understands how to play the game and how not to play someone else's. Take the issue of Greenland, for instance. He doesn't actually have the men or the political will to invade the place, but by lighting that place up like he has, by making it a bone of contention, he's made it where the Europeans have had to send soldiers in there. And as a result, now Greenland is simply too hot for the Chinese to go calling themselves planting their flag there, which under these circumstances could be just as effective as sending in the Marines. You see, the people who are actually serious about what they want, they don't put their finger to the wind and take an opinion poll. Dr. King told you that, remember? He doesn't make decisions based on Gallup polls. You can't be afraid to start a fight, because if you got the guts to knuckle up, then you can move obstacles out of your way, or at the very least, you illuminate the political landscape. When you provoke a fight, people are forced to take sides. And then you'll find out exactly who's with you and who's not. Trump is inadvertently and not intentionally actually fracturing the white solidarity necessary to keep white supremacy in place. Now, of course, we've seen this kind of fracturing before, the Civil War and both world wars, but the fact that you have this happening now, especially in countries where you had a lot of those white nationalists who got all hyped up precisely because Donald Trump was president and president again, now you're seeing these same people going, wait a minute, Donald Trump is insulting our war dead and he's talking about us as if we don't matter. The effect of Donald Trump's disrespect toward his fellow white peers may ultimately be short-lived, but the fact that it's even happening at all under these circumstances is worth noting. And he's not doing it because he wants to. He's doing it because as far as he's concerned, this is what it always has to be. Every once in a while, you got to go ahead and reestablish the top of the pecking order of white power so that all the other white folks know exactly who they're supposed to be taking orders from. This way, the pecking order is reaffirmed. White supremacy is not based on respect or mutual consideration, not even among their own. White supremacy is based on power, and that's it. That's at the top of their totem pole of values. In fact, it's the only thing on there. Long as they get power, long as it's in service of their power, as long as it expedites their power, it doesn't matter what they do or who they do it against. And for the people who don't like it, that's because now they're the ones who are on the receiving end. Yeah, it's a hell of a lot more difficult to simply sit there and go, that's just so sad when you see a white person who's being killed and you realize, ooh, that could be you. Yeah, today they're gunning down white motorists in their cars or white pedestrians on the street. The next day, maybe they kick in your door and decide that you're next. This is what concerns them. They're not concerned about the brutality that's going on. They're concerned about the fact that now some of them are getting caught up in it. And that's definitely not something that they want to see become habit forming. But black people also need to keep this in mind too. The exact same Minnesota authorities who for decades just basically couldn't do anything about the police killing black people, now that some white folks have been killed by authorities who are from outside the state. Now all of a sudden they can do something about that? No, they've always had the ability to do something. They've always had the ability to punish the killers. But their goal was to make sure that they held the line against black people. You have to force good people to live under oppression. And that's where the thugs in blue come in. Their job is to force compliance with white supremacy's dictates, what they call the law. The same people who were saying you can't say defund the police, now they're saying to abolish ICE. Yeah, that's what happens when you actually have to face reality. So as far as I'm concerned, let the orange man and his demented minions continue to run roughshod over those punks in Minnesota. I'm talking about the politicians, by the way. Let them and their usually lukewarm white liberal mouthpieces go ahead and froth at the mouth now and say something has to be done and that this is domestic terrorism, this is fascism, something has to be done. Why, this is the beginning of a genocide, I tell you. They don't know the meaning of the word. But black people are the main ones who we need to remind about this. The same way that we did with all of Biden's phony promises that he didn't keep. Now you got the authorities in Minnesota showing what they've always had the ability to do but just refuse to do for black people. We need to be reminded of this, so that the very next time they call themselves lying through their teeth and telling us what they can't do, we can point to all the stuff that they already did. You know, it's ironic the effect that the orange man has had, though under white supremacy we all recognize that the world has been turned upside down. But it's ironic that the man whose name is synonymous with lying has managed to make a lot of other liars tell the truth. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Gerald Copeland, Jessica Adams, Cedric Dillard, Atu Hammond, and Pamela Hyman. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.